politics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University, and I'm joined today in a special three-person show by Jay Carson and Will Miller. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Good morning. Good.
Doing well. How you guys doing?
I'm getting by here. It's a little earlier. We're doing this to kind of accommodate, my schedule, actually. So thank you guys for that. But, one of the things I wanted to mention before we got started is what we've heard from listeners on our host survey, at least part of what we've heard, is that people would like to maybe see more three-person shows. And we're kind of experimenting with that format, in fact, starting today, obviously. And if you haven't filled out the host survey, we're trying to get some feedback from you as I put together our 2020 schedule. It would be really helpful. It's a short, simple thing, though there's plenty of space for you to hold forth if you want to hold forth longer. And you can get that survey. You can see the link at the show notes to this show, and we would really appreciate you helping us out with that. So thanks very much. All right, I think we're ready to get right to it, Will. So if you wanna lead us off, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously the main story this week, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on where you fall, what might be the main story for a while still now is the impeachment process, the impeachment developments from the week. And just for some background, obviously it's been a busy week, and we see things coming more towards the public versus private side. So obviously, one thing to look at is the fact that Adam Schiff has scheduled out some more public conversations over the next week, including with former top Ukraine diplomat William Taylor, George Kent, who's a career department official. Marie Yovanovitch will be back as former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine next Friday. And again, the big difference here being they're testifying in a public setting instead of behind closed doors. And then obviously, we also saw this week that Gordon Sondland came out and said that he had a refreshed memory. So all of a sudden, his testimony has changed, and now it's revised to say that in the absence of any credible explanation for the suspension of aid, I presume that the aid suspension had become linked to the proposed anti-corruption statement. So a big switch there, and kind of undermines some of the things that Trump's been saying. And then obviously with Kurt Volker, Sondland, and then also Rick Perry, now referred to, I think, publicly as the three amigos related to Ukraine. We also see some of his testimony being brought public. And then also we have John Bolton not showing up. We have the whistleblower telling Trump to leave him alone, but at the same time saying he'll answer written questions under oath. So again, just kind of a big week with a lot of moving parts and pieces, but moving more towards what feels like a formal public process as opposed to happening just behind closed doors. So, Mike, when we look at the week and we look at what the week means for Trump and for Democratic efforts, what do you see happening? What do you think's going on?
Well, I mean, also with the release of the a number of the transcripts from those closed door hearings, and Bolton's attorney saying, "Hey, I've got some stuff that hasn't come out, but we have to wait for the that court case to decide on whether or not Bolton can be compelled to testify." Basically, it seems to me that the narrative that initially we had glimpses of is just solidifying, and that being that there was a sort of a two-track foreign policy. You had your career State Department folks who were trying to conduct what I guess I would call normal foreign policy. Then you had the Trump political team led by, Giuliani and with Perry in there, and certainly Sondland and a few others who were attempting to bend foreign policy in such a way that it would hurt Donald Trump's political opponent. Now, based on the evidence we see now, I think it's sort of, it's difficult. I think it's strange credulity to just dismiss this. And I don't think you can really make a principled case, at least against an inquiry, not to say to vote to impeach. And the sort of explanations that we're hearing for this are interesting. For instance, Lindsey Graham has suggested that Donald Trump's foreign policy is just simply too incoherent to be corrupt, which is an interesting defense. No, I'm not corrupt. I'm just incompetent. Others saying that, even if there is a quid pro quo, which at this point it's hard to deny, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Or, the other defense saying that even if there is, It's not an impeachable offense. And then later this week was, I think, the most fanciful one that some people are throwing around on the right, saying that, well, it's actually Sondland. And Trump didn't know anything about this. And Sondland is this evil genius who is manipulating foreign policy to Trump's ends without Trump's knowledge. And I don't know that that's going to get a whole lot of traction, certainly. But again, to me, this is just kind of what I would expect and not at all surprising.
My take on this is that we're still left, and the Sondland change testimony sort of plays into it. As I still don't think that people are seeing this as a legitimate process. If it's sort of like, it's almost like, again, to use the courtroom comparison, you go and you testify and you're cross-examined, and then you leave the courtroom, and then a couple days later you say, "Oh yeah, I'm changing my testimony," but now it's you're not subject to cross-examination, and again, that testimony isn't really testimony, right? It's sort of, well, here's my assumption, here's my opinion on something, and I think we've seen a whole lot of that, to the extent we've seen anything coming out of these hearings. It's, we're asking various people, do you think there was a quid pro quo? And they could say yes, or they could say no, but neither one of those is evidence, if you follow me. It's not, this person said this person said that. And my sense is that plays into Trump's hands as this continues.
That seems to be, for me, a lot of what's going on is from the Trump angle, from the Republican angle. It's almost like they recognize that the Democrats, to some degree, are on a clock here. The closer and closer this gets to the 2020 election, the muddier and muddier it makes the waters for everybody involved. So I feel like there's a lot of stall and delay tactics. And again, the throwing out of different ideas, different explanations, different potential defenses, if we view it that way, seems to play into that. The other part from this week that really grabbed my attention was the leaked story, and then Trump's Twitter response on the idea from Thursday that he had asked the Attorney General to hold a news conference and basically say that he had broken no laws on this phone call, as if it was going to be a be-all, end-all. And there's part of me that wonders, if Barr had actually agreed to do that, how that would impact this as well. Would that rally the base even more? Would that be, in some people's eyes, definitive evidence that nothing occurred? Or would that just make Democrats even hungrier for blood in the water?
Well, my take on all that is essentially the base doesn't need to be rallied, because absent Donald Trump on tape or in person saying, yes, I actually told Ukraine that I wanted Joe Biden investigated and aid would be withheld unless he was investigated. That, I think, would be the only evidence of a quid pro quo that would be accepted by most of Donald Trump's base. And I think, I don't know, Jay, I get the sense that that's the standard that you're going by, though maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, I think you need some kind of actual evidence to show that was the case. And Sondland's revised testimony, interestingly, I think he indicated, we thought there's a quid pro quo, but it was a quid pro quo not for the aid, but for a meeting. And I'm wondering, from the Democrats, does that change? Is one an impeachable offense and the other not? A quid pro quo to hold up aid from that had been appropriated by Congress versus a quid pro quo for essentially a photo op. Those would seem to be two different things. And I would think, if there's a quid pro quo of, look, I'm not going to have a meeting unless you say we're investigating the Biden connection. I don't know that there's an impeachable offense in the first case of holding up aid. Again, if the Ukrainians didn't know the aid was being held up, but if it's a question of, we won't do this, meeting photo op with you unless you do this, I'm not sure where's the crime in that, I guess.
I guess I'm wondering, you guys, if you would argue that this is essentially something that is so inconsequential in your view that that doesn't even rise to the level of something that should be investigated. I guess that's where I'm having the trouble. So, Jay, no, wait, let me just finish and say that, I think there are two different questions here. And the first question is this something that is significant and serious enough with enough potential corroboration that it deserves and that it merits an investigation? That's one question. The second question then is it enough that it merits an actual vote to impeach? And it seems to me that the Republican stance, at least in Congress, is that it doesn't even merit an investigation. And that, to me, that is incomprehensible to me, given the evidence and the transcripts that we've seen. So maybe I'm misinterpreting or misunderstanding your views on this, but maybe you can clarify that for me.
Well, from my end, Mike, and Jay, I'll let you have it in a second. I mean, what gets me on this is I feel like a lot of Democrats have moved to the second before looking at the first.
Sure.
The idea of the investigation, is it worth looking at? Maybe. And to Jay's point, maybe more so if it's about aid, not about just a meeting. But once you make it about impeachment before we've done the first step, especially after, for me, the public perception that the Mueller investigation didn't do what it was supposed to do, or we'd still be talking about that, it just leaves me wondering, why did we move right to the extreme of an investigation as opposed to starting by actually just looking at what we know? Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, no. Actually, that was a lot of what I was going to mention, and I think the only gloss I put on what Will said is there's investigations and there's impeachment inquiries. This country has seen tons of investigations. We have them all the time. We had investigation over Fast and Furious. We had investigation over Benghazi. There were investigations over Iran-Contra. All these things were investigations, and they took a look at it, but they weren't impeachment inquiries. And I think what Will's pointing at is kind of the point is, if you start saying we're going to investigate or call this an impeachment inquiry and look into this, it's sort of putting the cart before the horse. And I think most people realize that the Democrats have made up their mind. I mean, these folks who are conducting the investigation have said from the day he was elected he ought to be impeached, just on general principles. It's almost like saying, like, we believe there may have been a crime committed, but are you going to call it a police investigation, or is it a capital a murder trial? I mean, I guess that's my sense is you can investigate, and then if you find something that says, wow, this really looks like it could be a crime. For example, let's go with the Clinton parallel. The special counsel, did an investigation that was originally of Whitewater, and came across this situation of facts that indicated that the president had committed perjury. At that point, it was turned over then into an impeachment inquiry. So yeah, I think that's my side. There can be investigations, and it's one thing to investigate, and it's expected that you investigate your opponents. But impeachment's another. And my last, and I don't want to step on Will's toes too much, but the other piece of this that I think people are, the rhetorical question that occurred to me last night was, in what scenario, if any, would it be okay to request the Ukrainians to investigate Hunter Biden?
Well,
I'll just put that out there. Yeah.
Well, number one, it seems to me that you're both making the process argument, and I get that, and certainly I understand that you don't want to talk about the substance, or maybe I don't know. I shouldn't assume that, but it seems to me, and I guess this is the question I'm trying to get an answer to, is based on what you have seen from the actual substance. Yes. Forgetting all questions of process, let's put that aside just for now. Based on the substance that you've seen from the testimony, do you feel that what you've heard rises to the level where there should be an investigation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. There's that at least. Okay. I'm glad that we agree on that much, certainly.
Okay. Now ask the next question.
The next question, I guess, would be is, do you feel that this is the investigation that we should be having on that? And I know, Jay, you would say no. Right. Now, of course, we couldn't have a special prosecutor because that statute lapsed, and you can't. So it's one thing when you have, when who would be doing the investigation? I guess obviously the Justice Department wouldn't. Donald Trump's Justice Department would not be doing this investigation.
No. But sure, but you could still have. What I'm saying is, you could still have a congressional committee or a congressional investigation into something, and then the congressional committee makes a referral to the House Judiciary Committee to begin an impeachment inquiry or something like that.
Isn't that what we're doing now? I mean, that sounds like a great description of the process right now.
My concern is now it's guised in impeachment proceedings as
We've
opposed to an
started a-
investigation.
What's wrong with? I mean, it's a word. What's wrong with the word? What?
No, well, what's wrong with the word is it is throwing gasoline on the fire, and it implies that there is a grave offense, an offense that is so important that we would overturn an election over it. It is. I mean, and this may be an inapt metaphor, but it's like saying we're going to have a witch hunt. Let's say it's Salem in 1620. And someone says, look, there's some weird stuff going on here. People have been getting sick, and we're concerned. Someone in the community should investigate this. Okay, that's an investigation. Or you could say, people are getting sick. Something's going on here. We have concerns. There's a witch. We need to find the witch. Well, and I think that's sort of the second thing. You're sort of jumping to the there must be a witch. We just need to find it.
Well, the reason why that's a bad metaphor is because we actually have at least a partial rough transcript of what you can make a good argument is the president asking for a favor. I mean, this is not making up evidence. This is something that the president himself released. This is something that's been corroborated and extended by a number of people. This is something that the president's personal attorney has said he's made essentially a crusade of his. So that's why I think it's a bad metaphor. It's a totally inept metaphor because we have a lot, and this is evidence of something that is grave. And so the idea that it should be something like we're just looking into it, call it what it is, because if these charges are true, then the president should be impeached and removed. And that's why we have the process. Just calling it impeachment doesn't mean he should be impeached. It means that people should take a fair and impartial look at the evidence. And, I agree with Will. Will and Jay, you've said this before. Absolutely. It's the case that there are a lot, or some Democrats certainly, who just said, I don't care what we impeach him on. We just need him out of office. And I've said before I totally disagree with that. But not having the process simply because some people are biased. No, that's why we have this process to and so I reject the idea that, well, just because some Democrats would vote to impeach him no matter what, that we should just forget about the process and give the president a pass on this.
Well, and I'll say, Mike, my concern is more, it is process-based. I mean, I just said very clearly, I think it should be investigated. What I'm worried about is that this sets a precedent that anything that a president possibly does now starts as an impeachment inquiry potentially, as opposed to let's at least flesh out the ideas before we go that route. I'm worried about what happens after Trump, the first time a president steps on a landmine, and all of a sudden we're stuck in the gridlock of impeachment inquiries when investigations cause enough.
I would
that's
think
my only concern.
Yeah. And that, I would think that's not much of a concern in the sense that as long as we have presidents who don't play so incredibly fast and loose and run their foreign policy like an extension of their campaign, well, then that's not going to be a problem. So I guess I have a little more faith in the process than you guys do, because I think that these things are happening in part, sure, because of increased polarization, but in part because Donald Trump is an extreme outlier as a president. He seems to have much less respect for political institutions, for rule of law, even for basic norms of democracy than any other president that I can think of, Republican or Democrat, in my lifetime, and even further back than that. And so when you have somebody who so consistently seems to flout these norms, these things happen. And so it's not that to me, the fundamental problem here is that Donald Trump is incredibly out of line in so many ways, and he's brought this upon himself.
But I think we've seen a recent history of what I would call the politics of retribution.
Sure.
Obama gets in, Republicans go after Obama. Trump gets in, Democrats go after Trump. Let's be honest. After Clinton in the impeachment process, I honestly think Democrats would have went after Bush a lot harder and looked at some of these same ideas, if not for 9/11. I think that changes that one out of the discussion. But in reality, what I'm worried about is that tit for tat, you went after Trump, whoever you put in next, we're going to go after full bore. And if we can call it an impeachment proceeding, it becomes very political versus
Correct.
a process that really does need to be based on, a very abstract legality with the way that this is written. But I just worry that we get stuck in an era where the congressional presidential relationship becomes rooted in, if it's not unitary control, then we're going to be talking impeachment.
I think
as we've drifted to like the permanent campaign, right, that started under Clinton. I think what Will's saying, I'm 100%. It's now going to be the permanent impeachment campaign also.
Well, I mean, of course, only time will tell on this. I think I have a lot more faith in the process than you guys do. And maybe you're feeling a little more beleaguered because the president of your party happens to be somebody.
No, Mike, I have great faith in the process, and the process is.
I don't think you do. But I don't think you do, because if you did, you wouldn't. I don't think you'd be so hung up on this process just being misused, essentially. And, and it seems to me that, and I get what you're saying, you feel that the Democrats have just gone way out of line here. And what I'm saying is that I think certainly that's part of the story, but I think a bigger part of the story is Donald Trump is just a unique individual. And I would agree, if we have more presidents like Donald Trump who so incredibly flout all of these norms, that we're going to get more of this. But, it takes two to tango here. And so as long as we don't have a president like Donald Trump, left or right, I don't think this is going to be as much of a problem, though. I hear you guys disagreeing with me a little bit on that.
Really, really, really super quickly, because this is a fun discussion with the three of us, is that my issue is, if you're going to have an impeachment inquiry, just like if you're going to have a criminal investigation, at some point, someone needs to say, here is the crime with which you're being charged. They have to articulate what the charge is, not just he's violating norms, or because you violated norms, you seem like the kind of guy who would do this. So that's my issue, and I think that goes to when does an investigation become an impeachment inquiry? And I think it's when you have some articulable high crime or misdemeanor that you can say that was committed, and I don't see that. I see let's see what we can find to call a high crime or misdemeanor. And I'll throw my rhetorical question out. People don't have to answer it, but just think about it. Under what circumstances would it be appropriate to ask a foreign government to investigate a U.S. citizen, be that Hunter Biden or anyone else?
Well, we talked about this, Jay, you and I, last week, and actually a couple listeners said, Mike, you maybe had too much caffeine, or you're going into peanut butter pretzel withdrawal, but you were pretty rough, pretty emotional, and I sort of tried to tone that down. This is one of the things that got me a little upset. I think at that point, Jay, you and I were talking past each other a little bit, but here's my sense of that, because I think those are fair questions. You can't just say, well, you're a bad guy generally, so we're going to impeach you. I agree with you on that, and I'm sure, Will, you would agree with Jay, with me on that as well. So my take on this is that a high crime and misdemeanor, in this case, or the impeachable offense, if you will, is essentially asking for dirt or an investigation on a potential campaign rival as a condition of withholding something of value, which would be military aid from the Ukraine. And so now I'm pretty sure there's nothing in the U.S. code that would call that a crime, because, of course, there's only one person who could commit that act, and that would be the president. And no one's ever passed a law against that. But I would say that would be, if beyond a reasonable doubt, we could be demonstrated that Donald Trump withheld military aid to Ukraine in exchange for with the expectation that Ukraine would investigate specifically Joe Biden's son, I would say that that would qualify as an impeachable offense. And now I was wondering, well, what do you guys think about that? If that could be proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt, would you say that would be cause not only to impeach but to remove the president from office?
Well, let's think. Beyond a reasonable doubt that he has asked for, I'd say that is certainly grounds for an impeachment inquiry. At that point, you have articulated something that could be a high crime or misdemeanor.
No, that's why I'm saying beyond a reasonable doubt. So say it was not that there was evidence, but it was proven beyond reasonable doubt. So we're past the point of an investigation. There's an investigation, and there is evidence that convinces you beyond a reasonable.
The question is, is that an impeachable offense?
Yeah.
I don't know. Would I vote to make that an impeachable offense? I'd have a hard time, and I'll tell you why.
And just to be clear, Jay, we're talking about not removing the president from office, but
you're saying impeachment, yeah.
Right. So it sounds to me like you're saying that you don't even think that would rise to the level of calling for a trial in the Senate. That it's that sort of inconsequential.
Oh no, okay. I think I'd call for a trial in the Senate on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was saying. I mean, for me, I'll be honest with this one, and Mike, you'll appreciate it. I think if that was a Democrat and this was flipped, I'd absolutely want a trial in the Senate on those grounds. Not a question.
And I mean, so taking it to that next level, then again, if you're in the Senate and you are convinced that beyond a reasonable doubt the president did in fact do this, how it seems to me that would be justification, more than enough justification to vote to remove. To me, if a president is using foreign policy and essentially saying that congressionally approved aid, military aid to a foreign country that's fighting, in essence, a war, that I'm withholding this to help my personal campaign fortunes. To me, that is not just an impeachable offense, but I would want to see any president, Democrat or Republican, removed from that. That to me raises to the level of something that would call for the removal of a president from office. Because if that doesn't, I guess I'm not really sure what would.
Well, here's the funny part, Mike. I would normally agree with you, but with how this process has gone, I wouldn't vote to do that no matter what in this case, because I think the process has been so dominated by Adam Schiff and his agenda that I would hold that against Democrats and back somebody in that case. Although, if this had been done the way that Jay and I have talked about, with do an actual investigation first, find the results of the investigation, use that to actually impeach from the House and then bring to the Senate, if that was followed in a more process-based, non-political way, I'd be all for removal at that point. But the well has already been poisoned on this one for me.
So let me just be clear. So even if you think that Donald Trump did everything that Democrats are accusing him of doing, you couldn't vote to remove him because you're not a fan of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I'd consider it'd be jury nullification. I'd be no. Even though in reality, I think that probably is something that should get somebody removed.
Okay.
Well, and I think also when you're voting on impeachment, you have to consider more than one. It's not just did this person commit the crimes? Is he guilty? Is it an impeachable offense? But there's also sort of a duty to the country as a whole, and is a greater goal going to be served by doing this?
No, that's reasonable. Yeah, I think that's a. I think that's a fair point. And, and sometimes
talking about setting precedent and so forth, that sort of thing.
No, and sometimes we can be a little too legalistic, but thinking about the effects on the country, I agree with that. And were I a Republican senator at that point, that would play into my calculations. Of course, it can very easily become a rationalization, obviously. Sure. Oh, I would vote for this, but it would tear apart the country or something like that, and that's my concern. But yeah, and Jay, I didn't want to ignore the question that you asked, and it may seem like it, but
ignore it.
No, I don't want to ignore it because I think it's an important
You said
question.
It was rhetorical.
Yeah. Well, but I think it's an important question because I believe that there certainly are grounds under which a president can ask a foreign country to investigate And in fact, I believe there were grounds in the Obama administration when, Joe Biden and some others said, hey, you should look into this corrupt prosecutor who's not investigating companies like Burisma and so forth. And I think that when you do it in an open way through the foreign policy establishment, and you don't, for instance, use your personal attorney and say things like, oh, talk to Rudy, he knows all about Ukraine, well, then I think that's okay to do, because that's legitimate foreign policy, trying, as long as it's the goals of, the United States as a whole benefiting that, well, then of course. But if your focus is on, well, how does this help my campaign? And maybe secondarily or in a tertiary way, how does this help American foreign policy? Well, then that is questionable, if not just outright illegitimate.
The two can certainly coexist. You can certainly have, and typically it is.
Right.
Good policy is good politics.
They certainly. You're right. But that doesn't excuse you running foreign policy through your personal attorney.
Yeah. Well, something aside, because we could do a whole nother show on that. But my last thing, because I know we've taken up a whole lot, but I think this has been a really fun discussion. Well, the other thing that gives me qualms about this is compared to, say, the Clinton and the Nixon impeachments and what they were about, is this goes to a president's participation in foreign policy, as opposed to Clinton and Nixon were purely domestic, crimes that were alleged against them, and I think that troubles me a little bit. And I'm not saying that there's some constitutional line or legal line that says you can't impeach for things that are relating to conduct of foreign policy, but it's a little troubling that you can have an impeachment inquiry launched over an anonymous whistleblower's secondhand report over something the president said to a foreign leader. That would seem to be really stepping on some executive toes. And I think just as a separation of powers issue, that troubles me a little bit more, that Congress extending and again using this sort of thing of, he was saying this to a foreign leader, we can impeach him. That I find troubling, and I think no one's really articulated that yet, and it just occurred to me a minute ago. So, but I just wanted to throw that out there as reasons of why I would not vote to remove.
Right.
Well, there are other things happening in politics, much to the dismay of some. But obviously this week also, when we talk about Trump and the impact impeachment might be having on his presidential chances, the Republican Party as a whole, we also had elections, probably really 3 states that merit some discussion and some mention. In Virginia, we see the state house turn blue for the first time in a long time. In Kentucky, which, Mike, I'm sure you'll have a lot to add, we obviously see Andy Beshear defeat perhaps the most unpopular governor of our time in Matt Bevin. And then in Mississippi, despite having what I would consider a fairly strong Democratic challenger for Mississippi, Jim Hood still loses to Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves by 6 points. And for me, I think what's really interesting here is obviously in the case of Virginia, we see trends that have been happening for a while continue, in the sense of, we see a lot of areas that Democrats flip, and they're really those highly educated suburbs, lots of affluence. So we're looking at Nova, we're looking at the greater Richmond area, we're looking at Hampton Roads. In Mississippi, some will point to the fact, and I'll be curious for your take, guys, on what it means that Trump won Mississippi by 17 or 18 points, and Tate Reeves only wins it by, I think, 6 in the end. And then obviously in Kentucky, the Bevin is still I don't think Bevin has formally said he lost yet, but that news should be coming any day. So, Jay, what did you take away from the Tuesday night elections? What do they mean for those locations? And then what does it mean as a barometer for 2020?
My sense, and this is my usual answer to those kind of questions, is I'm always hesitant to read broad trends into off year, and this is particularly off year elections. And especially in places that are very different, locales and different types of races. I think Mississippi came down to, look, it's a red state. going in. That's very much the presumption. Even if you have a strong Democratic challenger, it's going to be a tough hill to climb. You had a good candidate this time, and he did well. I don't know that shows that anything has dramatically changed in Mississippi, or that it pretends anything for Trump. Virginia, I think, is more interesting on a national basis in that this was a vote with Virginia's redrawn districts. That, I think, is something we've talked about a lot, of gerrymandering, so forth. And this was part of Eric Holder's organization that, as conservatives like to say, they sue till it's blue, sort of sort of litigation. And I so my sense is there's something interesting to look at there, and I think it may be a combination of new districts in Virginia, and also Virginia has been trending more blue for the past probably 2 decades, right? And it is now Northern Virginia. You could very much call Swamp Central. So I think that Virginia doesn't shock me, and we'll see. And so again, in state races, I think it's because I've worked on a lot of state races, and it's a lot of times it's hard to compare to the national barometer. I mean, I've worked on in state house races where we've had a huge red wave sweep the state house, and yet have the state go blue for the presidential candidate that same year. So I don't always think, and again, Trump's a different situation because it's sort of has kind of this gravity of like a supermassive black hole, and kind of pulls in all sorts of things into his orbit that wouldn't otherwise be there. But I don't see a huge bellwether sort of thing, other than to note the continuing trend of Republicans having trouble in some suburban areas, affluent suburban areas.
Yeah, what Jay said. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, it's the Kentucky race was kind of unusual in the sense that, someone once said that if you're a Republican in Kentucky, you actually have to try to lose. And Bevin did that. I mean, he
really did. Jesus.
Yeah, he's a really off-putting sort of guy to a lot of core Democratic constituencies. So he not only did things that these constituencies didn't like, primarily the K through 12 teachers. That's always a dangerous group to upset. And, labor unions, but he did it in a very pugnacious sort of way that was almost guaranteed to ramp up turnout. And so that's why I think, Kentucky's a little unique in that sense. But, again, it's pretty clear that Trump definitely embraced Bevin, and Bevin embraced Trump, obviously. And so that strategy, that seems to be what the Trump strategy is going to be going forward, right, into 2020, is basically put all your chips on increasing turnout for your core supporters, largely in the rural areas. And to me, that's a smart strategy, because I can't imagine that there are too many people who are sort of ambivalent about Donald Trump. And the idea of Trump trying to convince elements of the electorate to vote for him, that does seem like a dumb strategy. So I guess the question is Trump going to be able to increase rural turnout more than Democrats are able to increase suburban turnout for them? And that's an open question. Certainly, it didn't work for the Trump side in Kentucky. And while I'm also, Jay, reluctant to look into that too much, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But that definitely, obviously, is the trend, with suburbs going a little bit more toward Democrats. But it also occurs to me that I wonder how much of a Republican thing that is, as opposed to a Trump thing, because, Trump obviously hits a lot of those. I wouldn't call him a white nationalist, but he hits a lot of those sort of white male. No, I wouldn't. That white.
I wouldn't
male,
call you a child molester, but
no, I mean, I wouldn't, because that's what. And I'm saying that not as some sort of a swipe, but saying that a lot of people are talking about his white nationalist politics. I wouldn't say that, and that's my point. But my point is that he strikes a chord with a lot of disaffected, white, not very well educated voters in rural areas, and so But is that a Trump thing? Is that go away if you don't have Trump on the ticket? Because a lot of people are saying, well, maybe this is just a Trump thing. And once Trump is off the scene, that doesn't necessarily mean that Republicans have lost the suburbs or anything like that.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting question because, of course, whatever happens in 2020, the larger struggle continues, right? And I think there are a lot of Republicans who are concerned and asking themselves that question is, do I want to throw in my chips with what makes sense for Donald Trump, of course, and that's a perfectly sound strategy for Donald Trump. But is it a good strategy for the Republican Party going forward? I think not. I hope more Republicans do that strategy because we'll get more Democrats elected. But I imagine that you guys are not terribly comfortable with the strategy that focuses on just really increasing turnout with rural voters at the expense of especially suburban voters. Is that right?
Oh, this is the problem with the three-person thing.
We know who's coming next.
Yeah, exactly.
And for Will to answer. For me, no. I think you can do both. And the other sort of gloss that I would put on this is, I think you're right. The loss in suburban affluent voters may be more a Trump thing than a Republican thing. But also when you're looking at the candidates at the state level, in Kentucky and in Mississippi, neither one of the Democrat candidates in those, I think you used that correctly, in those races were touting a wholesale revamp of the economy, Medicare for all, Green New Deal sort of thing, like you may have a nominee doing in 2020. And I think a lot of these suburban voters who are put off by just the Trump persona and the tweets and the nonsense, that sort of thing. If push comes to shove of, well, do you want a jackass or a socialist? I mean, they might stick with jackass. So
and that's.
Sorry, go ahead, Will. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
The thing I'd say is when it comes down to that. The rural voter turnout, I think the way you phrase that, Mike, is so spot on the question being, can Trump up those numbers enough to make up for population changes, redrawn maps, all of those fun things? And that's, to me, where it ties back to the story we spent the first 30 minutes talking to. Everything Democrats do related to this impeachment inquiry raised the opportunity for rural white farmer who is disengaged at this moment to decide, I'm sick and tired of Democrats going after the guy I voted for or supported or would have supported. So that's where I think this has to become part of that conversation. And that's one of those things that we're not going to be able to predict.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to tell who's going to show up or not show up.
Yeah. One thing I know, guys, we got to move on, but I have to say one more thing to kind of make a personal recommendation exactly. But, it occurred to me after the Kentucky election that if Kentucky had used ranked choice voting, Matt Bevin would be governor because there were over 28,000 votes.
Or there was
Libertarian.
Libertarian, yeah.
Over 28,000 votes for him. Bevin lost by around 5,000, and most of those Libertarian votes would have gone for Bevin in a ranked choice thing where Bevin would have been their second choice. Boom. Maine's doing it now for congressional elections, and there's actually a number of states that have legislation about that. In fact, there was a bill in Congress introduced at the end of September called the Ranked Choice Voting Act to make it a national requirement. And I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. Jay, I know you don't like it. And Will, you and I are actually going to be going back and forth on that because it's one of the chapters in our book. And I wanted to throw it in there because, as you guys know, I love ranked choice voting. I think it leads to better, more small d Democratic results. And in this case, it would have led to a more large R Republican result. But anyway, I wanted to throw that in. And
I just like, Mike, that you just led for a path to Bevin to still be governor.
It works both ways. That's my point, is that it helps better to reflect the will of the people. And I think that probably you can make a case that in Kentucky, a majority of the voting public would have preferred Matt Bevin to Andy Beshear. And because we don't have ranked choice voting in Kentucky, that will of the majority of the voting public has been thwarted. And I think regardless of whether you're a liberal, a Democrat or Republican, that should be a concern to you, which is why ranked choice voting is awesome. Anyway,
what happens when you have undervotes? Will, you can take that up in the book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a whole lot of other issues, but yeah. Hey, but before we get to the next story, I wanted to just take a minute to thank our newest supporters. Or it's actually an old supporter. I don't know if he's old, but someone who's been with us for a while who recently doubled his monthly support for the
No
show.
way.
Doubled, yeah. Noah, thank
Awesome.
you so much. And I believe, Noah, I think I owe you a coffee mug and or a
Please.
tote bag. So let me know if you'd like that, and I'll get that out to you. And also, we have another new supporter this week who asked to remain anonymous, an anonymous
Can't blame
donor.
him.
But
Not a whistleblower, is it?
Jay, I would have been so disappointed if you hadn't said that. I kind of just anyway. But anyway, you know who you are, even if no one else does. I do too. But we will not reveal your name, unlike any whistleblowers. But I wanted to say thanks again. And of course, when you become a monthly sustaining supporter through Patreon, you get the little show, the shout out, but also there's our weekly bonus show, the quick take, coffee mug, tote bags, all kinds of stuff. And to check it all out, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys, or you can go to politicsguys.com/support. All right. So, we have one more story, don't we?
Yeah, we have one more story, and it's kind of the perfect trifecta today. We talked about the impeachment, we talked about Tuesday results, and now we'll talk about everybody trying to beat Trump. So I think really a couple of focal points from this week and from the last few weeks, starting with obviously Elizabeth Warren. And Elizabeth Warren, Medicare for All, really doubling down on her stance there, coming out with a plan that explains details of how it would be paid for, eliminating the insurance company profits, administrative fees, having the rest of the costs paid for on having large companies pay to the government what they normally pay for premiums anyways, and then putting a surcharge on really high-income individuals in the United States. And to be honest, I mean, she's come out on the offensive with this. She's called out Joe Biden, Mayor Pete. She's called out Amy Klobuchar, who've kind of fought against her and saying that she had no real ultimate plan. So we have Elizabeth Warren sitting on one end. Then we obviously have Michael Bloomberg saying that he's going to run. And again, with Bloomberg, it's really interesting. Obviously, with his run getting traction now on social media, Signal Labs, who I tend to look at for some social media analytics, actually says that 62% of the conversation about his presidential bid is actually negative right now. And then the other issue that comes with it really is the fact that from the Democratic angle, and Mike, obviously, I'll be curious for your take on this. This is an almost 80-year-old guy who is white as can be, who supported stop and frisk policies and has a history of just the Me Too movement all over. So it'll be interesting to see what he means despite the money he has. And then lastly, I think we have to point to the fact that the battleground state polls that came out this week did not suggest that Donald Trump is losing in a way that would be a clear case for Democrats. I mean, if you look at Trump versus Biden, and you look at Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina, Biden's winning in 4 out of the 6, but by no more than 5 points. Bernie Sanders is beating Trump by 1 or 2 points in 3 states. And then against Elizabeth Warren, there's 2 states that are even, with Elizabeth Warren winning Arizona by 2. So this is not something where, despite some on the left and some pundits saying that, Trump's going to lose by 10 points, the polls today aren't suggesting that that's necessarily the case. So, Mike, I gave you 3 options. Which track do you want to head down?
Well, I guess I'll start with Warren, because that seems to me to be, I don't know, I'm necessarily bigger, but it seems to me, Warren released this Medicare for All financing thing because she knows it doesn't stand a chance. This is a political document. And I think this is a case of Elizabeth Warren positioning herself as kind of the wonkier version of Bernie Sanders with a plan for everything, basically forced her hand. But it also, I think, paints her into a corner. There's a reason candidates keep campaign proposals vague, especially in primaries. So they can't be completely ripped apart, which Warren's plan is being done to by her own party. Larry Summers looked at it and said, this is just crazy math. A whole bunch of other, prominent Democrats have just said, this is just nuts, essentially. And that's handing, obviously, someone like Donald Trump or Republicans just great material to use should she be the nominee. So that, I think, is obviously part of the reason why Michael Bloomberg entered the race, not just Joe Biden being weak, but the prospect of Elizabeth Warren potentially being a weak general election a candidate. And those polls, I think, would, even though, hey, it's one poll a year out, and I think there's a lot of issues with that, but still, it's cause for concern. Democrats shouldn't look at the national polls and say, oh, we're fine, because, of course, that's not how presidential elections work. Now, I did want to say, because, we've talked not as much about policy as I'd like, obviously. I think as all of us would like, but that's just the nature of campaign season, I guess. But what kind of bugs me about the whole Medicare for all debate essentially is I hate the way my party's framing it. I really do. I think it's being framed in exactly the sort of way that gets a lot of support from Democratic activists and progressives, but is destined to fail in a larger audience, and to fail abysmally. I mean, if I were in charge of messaging, I guess I'd pitch it this way. General Motors says that healthcare costs for employees, just healthcare costs for their employees, add somewhere around $1,500 to the price of every single vehicle. Now, no non-U.S. automaker has to take on those costs because their governments take care of it. And so my pitch would be, isn't it time that we stop fighting with one hand tied behind our backs and support our great American companies as much, if not more, than foreign governments support theirs? And okay, that can be picked apart too, but at least I think it's more of a centrist kind of pitch that maybe might get somewhere. And so I really feel like my party sometimes is shooting itself in the foot by proposing policies that I like, but not framing them in the right way. And I think that's a lot better frame. So kind of more of an opportunity and growth frame rather than sort of a fairness frame, I guess.
Yeah, but that's not what is selling these days. And although I think at least not in the primary among Democratic activists.
Absolutely.
I was going to say Larry Summers said the math looks like a woman did it. Just kidding. I'm kidding, Larry.
No. We should put that. Hold on. We should put that in context because Summers was president of Harvard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, when Summers was president of Harvard, he got into hot water and ended up not being president of Harvard because of some comments he made about women and the sciences and not potential fitness and that kind of thing. So that wasn't Jay being sexist. That was Jay making comment on something Summers said.
Joking about what Larry said or didn't say, which again I think he was railroaded back then. But setting that aside, something that has come out about Obamacare, right, over the past couple of years is that, hey, it looks like it's more popular than it used to be, and it's also very popular among people who don't have it. And I think there's something there that a lot of people like the idea of there being this safety net, right? That, oh, if something happens, I know that this is there. Oh, I know I can get pre-existing conditions covered. Oh, my kids could stay on my insurance. And I think that's maybe where the Democrat base is, or where America tends to be, right? They're happy with their own insurance. They think, okay, mine's doing fine. My employer, I like my insurance. I'm concerned if something should happen to me, either employment-wise or catastrophic health-wise, would I be okay? And they want that safety net, but they aren't necessarily looking for a remake of the U.S. economy. And I think that's what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are proposing, and they think it sounds great, but most people aren't looking for that.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with that. And I think too much it's framed on both sides in kind of an all or nothing sort of thing by extremists on both ends. And I guess that's why all of us are more or less centrist, because we don't sort of buy into that logic that we need to remake the entire economy. And I get a lot of hits obviously from the progressive wing of my party. I hear a lot from progressive listeners, and that's maybe my Burkean side coming out, but I get very uncomfortable with massive remakes of the economy, which is not to say that I'm not for a more robust social safety net. I absolutely am. And my point for that is that I think it not only kind of meets those equality and fairness and social justice things, and that's important to me, but also I think you can make a good case that it also can be an engine of economic growth and opportunity because, Jay, as kind of you alluded, if people have at least that a bit of a kind of cushion underneath them, then they're going to be more likely to do things and try things and be entrepreneurs and take risks. And we want to encourage that. And that, to me, seems to be the sort of bipartisan centrist message that can really resonate with people. And unfortunately, I don't hear it from enough folks.
But let's talk about the left-wing progressive part of your party, Mike.
I'm
going to use those poll results.
Yeah.
Use those poll results to look at it. And we hear from progressives all the time that, all Democrats want progressives and there's this great, untapped American potential here. And then you look at the battleground polls. And Joe Biden beats Trump in 4 out of the 6 states, Bernie in 3, Elizabeth Warren in 1. I just don't honestly believe. I think there are a lot of Americans who might like a few progressive ideas, and they're typically hand-picking which ones those are. It's not an across-the-board, we want to be ultra-progressive in every area. But at the end of the day, I think we are seeing some of that centrist messaging playing a role, especially in the battleground states where Joe Biden is out polling Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, especially against Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, that's actually that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah, because there is a lot of pushback, and certainly, obviously, part of that is people like Buttigieg and Biden trying to occupy that sort of middle lane, basically. So part of its campaign strategy, but also Joe Biden is kind of a centrist guy. Now, for someone like Buttigieg, I think it's more of a strategy. He's a little more left than he's sort of, at least he started out a little more left, and he's kind of conveniently, strategically tacked to center left, and I get that certainly, but yeah, I guess you're right. There is a little bit more of it than I initially suggested. Yeah.
The other thing, going to Will's point on polls, is I saw one the other day talking about like approval for Medicare for all, and the sense of how many like this idea in theory? Yes, well, it's fairly high, but there's a tremendous drop off when the second question is answered. Of do you understand you'd have to give up your private insurance?
Yeah, I mean, that's
whoa, wait a minute, okay,
Well, yeah, because as you pointed out, Jay, most people who have insurance, and like half people have insurance through their employers, and then a bunch of people have it through obviously older folks, social Medicaid. Most of those people are relatively happy with what they have, and so and that's a big issue for the Warren plan. Any plan that would remake this is how do you manage the transition, and that's even a tougher question, I think, than sort of long-term benefits and financing, because that transition period is just going to be a bear. And so no one has a good answer to that, at least as far as I'm concerned to this point. But, as to, I know we're running a little bit late, but I wanted to mention the Bloomberg thing as well, because, what occurred to me, if Mike Bloomberg wins the nomination, basically, we would have 2 septuagenarian white male New York billionaires competing
both
for the presidency.
Both with histories of questionable actions with women.
I mean, and then I look at the field. Bloomberg 77, Trump 73, Biden 76, Sanders is 78, Warren is 70. I'm like, my God, at some point, right, guys, we're going to get to the post-boomer age in politics. It's got to happen eventually. But I can understand, in our Facebook group this week, someone was talking about boomer-splaining and the boomers. And after a while, it does tend to grate, I think, a little bit. But obviously, Trump, and aside from being billionaires, there are some pretty important differences between Trump and Bloomberg. For instance, for one thing, Bloomberg is a whole lot richer than Donald Trump. Look, Trump is a baby billionaire. Trump is a real billionaire, right? I mean, and of course, Trump is, calling Bloomberg Little Mike. Bloomberg's only 5'8", Trump is 6'3". So I guess that's going to be the moniker for him. But we talked a little bit just earlier about Bloomberg being a Democrat. He's not really. He's really about as centrist as you get, right? Because he was a Democrat, then he became a Republican and ran for mayor of New York City, and then he became an independent, and then he became a Democrat, and now he's donated over $100 million to Democratic causes. And kind of a neat thing about Bloomberg's potential presidential campaign is because he's the 15th richest person in the world. He basically, he has said he would self-finance his presidential campaign, which would mean that under current debate rules, he would not qualify for any of the presidential debates because they're based on campaign contributions. But
Well, that's okay, Mike, because the left says Donald Trump just talks to himself anyways.
But I mean, even for the primaries, that would be an issue. And but certainly in the funding, just a couple years ago, I think Mike Bloomberg donated $1.6 billion to Johns Hopkins, his alma mater, and there would be no problem with him throwing $1 billion on a political campaign, and that would be about what it would take, I would imagine. So, but I don't see him
Well, I think it'd
getting
be more like 20 billion.
No, not at all. Because if you look back at 2012, overall fundraising for both sides was around $1 billion on each side. In 2016, it was actually a little bit less than that. So no, $1 billion is all you need. So no.
Well, maybe I'm looking at overall spending.
Now you might be looking overall
out,
spending in
'cause I
all
thought,
elections.
yeah.
But no, for the presidency, it's around $1 billion. So that would be Bloomberg could toss that off with no problem, But I don't really see this as being that big of a deal because I agree with Mike Bloomberg of March, saying I don't see how I get through the Democratic primaries, and I still don't see how he gets through the Democratic primaries. In fact, I think this could actually give him, and with the result that's his least favored result, and a lot of centrists' least favored results, it hurts Biden and Buttigieg just enough, and maybe Klobuchar, who's not really a thing at this point yet polling-wise, but it hurts them just enough to give a little bit more of a boost in delegates to or it splits the delegates, give a little bit more a boost to Sanders and particularly Warren, and we end up with, I think, potentially a greater likelihood of Warren being the nominee. So if you're a progressive, I think you would like Bloomberg getting into the race, but if you are a centrist, I don't know if this is particularly good news. At least that's my take.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think if I'm sitting there, I look at Biden and I'm like, this is the guy that you have Biden supporters. But at the same time, when I think about it, some of the biggest concerns about Joe Biden, I feel like, are still issues for Michael Bloomberg. If you have female voters that are looking at Biden and saying, we don't like some of the allegations and some of the behaviors, Michael Bloomberg's not going to make them feel any better about those.
Yeah, but his kid didn't work for Burisma. I mean,
that we know of yet.
That's
that we know of yet.
Yeah, that we know. But that's quite honestly more because it's almost as if Biden sort of, by his candidacy is going to step in and it's sort of like you can't have the impeachment inquiry and have Biden as your nominee, I think is the problem. You can have one or the other. And Bloomberg certainly has problems. And I would tend to agree that he's not going to fare well in the Democratic primary, especially as a late entrant at this point, and somebody without any real machinery in the Democratic Party. Yeah, which I think is so important in a primary, and it's much different than running for mayor of New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we thought, Jay, you and I think talked about that in relation to Hillary Clinton thinking about and now, deciding it looks like not to enter the race, because even if you have a lot of money, getting the people and getting the infrastructure built up out of nothing, that's you can throw as much money as you want at it, but if the best people are taken, I mean, There's only so much you can do. You can't create time, basically. And so even with all his money, I just don't think that this is the candidacy that's going anywhere. So, but we will see. God knows I've been wrong about other nominees, so we'll see on that. But hey, guys, I know we're running a little long. Before we closed, I wanted to mention once again that we have that Politics Guys host survey, and we will put the link up on the website. We would really appreciate it if you filled it out. It only takes like a minute or so, basically. And again, you can comment if you want. And also, if you're doing that, you might want to comment and let us know what you think about this 3-person format. I don't know how you guys feel. I actually really kind of like this. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. So, and listeners, if you guys like it, it's a little more of a technological hurdle for us, but nothing we can't handle. And if it's what you want, we want to hear about it. So please do that. Again, the link's on the show notes. But as soon as we're done with this, we're also going to be doing a 3-person bonus show. And what are we talking about this week, Will?
What we're reading.
What we're reading. Yeah, we have all kinds of interesting stuff that we are reading. I know, and so Also, Trey has a quick take for people at the $5 a month supporter level and above. And if you're a supporter, that'll be in your app by your podcast app by the time you hear this. If you're not a supporter, you can just go to patreon.com/politicsguys or politicsguys.com/support. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, you can at mail@politicsguys.com. There's our Facebook page, which has just been really interesting, I think, in the last week or two. That's facebook.com/politicsguys. And we're also on Twitter @politicsguys. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to the show yet, that would really help us out. We would appreciate it greatly if you did that. And if you could spread the word by, talking about the show to folks and liking us and leaving positive reviews, that would be helpful as well. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Will Moreno, Andra Masker, and Daniel Toe. Today's show is produced by Will Miller. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.